morning, everybody. Hello and welcome to the second annual Cyber-Physical Convergence Forum DC for the DMV. My name is Pelham Rowe, and on behalf of CTG Intelligence, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you here to this fantastic facility. We are very grateful to Fannie Mae and to Robert Facito and his whole team for welcoming us today. Now, leading us up for our first panel, and I'd like to invite our panelists up to stage, will be Chuck Randolph, Chief Security Officer at Bornstein, and many other hats. Chuck is going to be marshalling a great panel, including Drew Alexander, Enterprise Resiliency and Crisis Management at Fannie Mae, Jamie Quarrelles, Program Manager for the District's Citywide Continuity Preparedness Bureau, Division of Operations and Intelligence Division, District of Columbia Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. We're also very pleased to welcome Josh Bornstein, Chief Security Officer at FEMA, and also Brittany Galli, C-Suite Advisor and Strategist at BFG Ventures. If you'll take your place at the stage, we have a roaming mic that goes back and forth, and I will leave you in Chuck's very capable hands.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you got some coffee, and thanks to Fannie Mae for what a great venue. We were talking beforehand. I mean, I've known Felon for a long time, both personally and professionally, and I'm quite impressed with the pathway that these have taken and the life of their own that they've taken. And I remember when, I would say it's been a smaller venue with smaller discussions, and over the years it's grown to quite the event. So, Felon, thanks to you as always for putting together such a great show. I can't think of a better way to start than discussing resilience. This is, FEMA said this is the year of resilience at the COP28, and I think as we're thinking about modernization and convergence, there's no better way to think about getting left of bang than after the incident happened, and then we go back and talk about how do we not do that again? How do we not get beat up again? Because oftentimes the best learning comes when we fall down, but it's not about staying down, it's about how quickly we get back up and not repeat mistakes. So we have quite a few things that we want to go through today, such as emergencies as a facilitator, convergence, the single security professional being off the table, what if resilience isn't there? I know, shocking to everybody in the audience. And then perhaps tabletops or war games as a way forward, and some other things. So I'd just like to start and ask this idea of emergencies as the chief convergence facilitator. How do they drive us to, after the fact, maybe get left of bang, or before the fact, have those conversations so we can hyperscale our network? And I'd go ahead and say, first response goes to the host, so Fannie Mae. Drew, what do you think?
Oh, great. Yeah, is this on? Can you hear me okay? Yep. All right. Well, the way I look at this, and particularly for emergencies or crises at Fannie Mae, I think one of the most important aspects is making sure that you've got a really repeatable process that you can run across any vertical at any time. And that really, I think crisis management, and if there's any team members here that have worked with me, I'm sure you're rolling your eyes now, I say this all the time, is that crisis management is relationship management, and relationship management is convergence. It's where different functions come together to solve problems. And emergencies can be a huge driver for that. And I find that the more repeatable your process is, the more standard you engage folks, the more you can solve things together. And that does a couple of things. I think one of the biggest is that it honors subject matter expertise. You're not really breaking down silos, because those silos still exist. But what you're doing is you're allowing teams to focus on the things that they do best, rather than having an information security person trying to do communications or figuring out what to tell the regulator. You have them doing information security work. With Mike's team at Fannie Mae, rather than trying to figure out what we're telling the workplace, focuses on engaging with law enforcement and securing our perimeter. Those are the types of things that we can do by having a really robust crisis process that engages all stakeholders when they need to be engaged.
I would say, how do you add to that in terms of bringing people together to have those discussions beforehand and say, look, we're talking about the what ifs, but we're talking about it now, and we can use our network. What would you add to that?
So exercise is important. Certainly that's the case. A really robust, as I also keep using that word, after action process is really significant. Making sure that you are learning from the mistakes you make. Building it into your process. It's iterative.
And what would you add to that?
Me?
Yeah.
Brittany Galli, nice to see you all. Thank you, Fannie, for having us. So I'm fortunate. I do a wide variety of work over the CISO, CSO, and the CIO level at a lot of companies. And we're seeing a couple things about not just convergence, but about strategy for emergency management, but also disaster recovery. I'll say the three things are AI governance. Obviously, they know they need to do something, but they know they either need to build, buy, or get run over. And that governance that they put in place and the removal of those roadblocks is actually what is going to make their secret science of their business either burn and use it for revenue generating, operations, and or save them in a scary situation. That's one. Second is a complete overhaul of their disaster recovery plans, operations, and training. One of my CIOs, as an example, is going through an entire data warehouse unplugging activity. So he says on this day, I'm going to show up to this data center. I'm not telling you which one, and I'm going to start unplugging things and see how big. And this is a federal contracting thing. Wow. We'll know. And he says, I'm going to go do this, so be ready. And his challenge to the team is, you all better have practiced to a point of that level. And I think we haven't done the exercise yet globally, even in the United States, and we need to get there, right? I think there's opportunity for growth. And then the third point is that, or at least again, what I'm seeing from that level is that there is no opportunity to, have the plan B that I haven't tested, right? And them building that into their CapEx budgets and so on and so forth, I think is now mandatory. The cyber side of that, the number one cybersecurity incident at all companies right now is still email, right? Phishing. And we're seeing that happen at such an aggressive rate, and especially the United States, that you have to look at it from a CSO perspective of, I need to now assume that my systems are down, so I can't get into my SaaS-based access control, and I have no internet. What am I going to do, right? And so I think building that disaster recovery from a strategic level is an absolute necessity for at least the emergency management, is assume everything's down, now what? So.
Well, Josh, how do we get beyond that? Like, hey, I'm going to come and shut stuff down. Is there a way we can get left of bang of that conversation so we don't have to have leaders that come in and say, you know what, you're all not doing it, so I'm going to shut the lights off and see how it works?
Well, I love to be that guy who's unplugging things, and people really makes you very popular with other folks. So, thanks for asking that. The first thing I'll mention is I really agree with what I'm hearing from my colleagues, and it's when you have the right people doing the right job and making sure that they're the experts that you lean on, they also, over and over again, they seem to learn a little bit about each other's jobs. And so that way, I know who to call, I know my comms people and my IT people, but do the IT people know the comms people? And that's more important. That way, when somebody unplugs me, they can still go on. And that's critical, and that shared knowledge and learning is really good. I'm not AI.
I was going to say, from the matrix, right?
But resilience is key, and I was glad that the administrator has declared this the year of resilience, and she actually called me out at a meeting recently, and she said, hey, let's ask somebody on the operations side back at house, what does that mean to you? And it gave me an opportunity to talk about how we do resilience and security, because those words don't always go together.
Yeah.
It's always that, well, it would be nice to do that, but we don't have the budget, or we don't have this, that, and the other. We're not always as well resourced as I wish we were. However, we do it through our people. And if I can have a security manager that deploys to a disaster, if that person is not just a physical security expert, maybe that's their background. Let's teach them some personnel security, some vetting. Let's teach them some fraud identification. Let's teach them, fill in the blank. Then that's my resilience. It's built in there. And so then I have 200 deployable assets that if there's a really big thing, they can go and do that, and they know a little bit about what everybody else does, they know who to call, but they also have that innate knowledge. And so I'm not worried about what happens if a pandemic wipes out part of a workforce. Worried about it, yes, but I can respond to it, I'm ready for it.
Right. I think there's something to be said for that, like organizational flinch. What can we learn from boxing? You take a punch, you flinch, you're probably going to take 5 more. I know I just watched some fights the other night, and I was thinking about that from an organizational resilience point of view. A lot of times I think what we do, and I'm curious to get the DC point of view on this as well, is like, look, we have an organization, we're getting a punch. Is it a pandemic? Is it a terror incident? And I don't mean this tongue in cheek. What is the incident? What is the punch coming? Can we just fight through that initial flinch so that we can get to our practices. I love your idea of like, look, we're all out there. At some point, everyone that's part of FEMA is a crisis response technician or person. Doesn't mean they're unplugging or plugging in, but they're here to kind of help you get to the, I'm here to help you get through the flinch so we can get to the response and enable discussion around what's the next steps maybe.
Yeah, everyone at FEMA is an emergency manager, whether you are an accountant, whether you are a logistician, everybody's an emergency manager, and the emergency could be a security emergency, it could be something else, and so that's exactly.
Well, there's something, I think when I was a young man watching, gosh, I can't think of the author's name, but essentially it was something on PBS when I only had like 4 channels, and I was watching something about Disney, and there's something we could take from Disney, like everybody knows, like when you're in front of house, you're a character, you're this, you're that, so when you're on FEMA, you're a FEMA character. I don't mean that in a negative kind of way, but we're here to help, I'm here to listen, I'm here to help you get to the next level. You probably deal with this on a daily basis, trying to, I can't think of any more coordination than here. Just think about your title and all the things that you have to try to get people to come to the table. How do you do it?
Practice. Really, for our agency, our primary role is to coordinate, especially during emergencies. So we have those relationships established so that we call on our partners to come in, we look to identify resources, but also the whole notion of convergence and letting the professionals do their jobs, but also working together to get things squared away. For example, I agree with what I've heard. Certainly, training and exercising is very important. And also resilience. I think we have a role in ensuring that the public is resilient, so that when something happens, security can do what they need to do. Physical security to take place. But also, we have to continue to educate our workforce in terms of cyber hygiene.
Yeah.
We've done COVID, so now we know that everybody can work from home. But we have to reinforce the idea of, are these people working from a safe network?
Yeah,
you can't control, you have to remind people that they have a role in what they do in order to
think about that duty all of a sudden when post-COVID, they're like, hey, we can work from home, we're forced to work from home, we've got it, and then they're going to continue to do that now, like, oh, convergence, resilience, duty of care, all is extending beyond places that probably people in this room never thought of it would be 6 years ago.
But also, too, we have to look at, when we think about resilience, the past several years, how many natural disasters have come about? And while we think, we're looking at, hey, but what happens if everything is wiped out? Look what happened in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
How can you expect your employees to work with all the infrastructure? Is it not there? We have to also look at the next level, that if we have those major disasters, how are we leveraging our security, our IT? And also, we need to look at the human factors when we look at this. It's not just security, IT, but what are the human factors that may come to play? What may impact our ability to respond based upon, some human things. Sometimes we look at cyber issues in the workplace, but, is the issue really because people are burnt out? Is there poor management in terms of educating people? What needs to be done?
Well, let's pivot to that idea of convergence, the idea of, business continuity and security as a convergence point, I've always said, like, I think convergence is an old term, it's been around for 10 years, but I think a lot of these, we were just at dinner or at lunch yesterday talking about asymmetric and how that word is coming back as well, and I think some of these things that we experienced before, now we're at a point where we kick that can down the road and now there's nowhere else to kick it, and we're forced to kind of like come to grips with it. What are your thoughts about that in terms of, continuity as a convergence, either as a pressure point to cause convergence or a place to have discussion around convergence?
One of the things I'll add is we were talking on a pre-call about the value of planning versus the plan, and that was a great conversation. And it was, well, the plan's great, and we all know the plans that stay on the shelf, or we've seen this happen time and again. But the value comes in bringing the people together to plan. So we're talking business continuity. Okay, who's where, who's doing what systems work, what don't, and then break it and do it again. And just getting with the people to make that happen, and getting the systems and exercising those muscles. We don't do it enough. Everyone's busy, everyone's doing something, their day job, right? But that planning is key, and that really does make the difference, because it doesn't matter what the scenario is. We talked about that too. It doesn't matter, aliens landing in the middle of the National Mall, fine. But what are we going to do about that, right? Like, how that response is not going to be all that different than something else, and so really key.
That's actually a good point. I think about the book World War Z. If you've not read it, I highly recommend it, because really it's just a big metaphor for preparedness, and the idea of, like, what is the X? Okay, let's make sure that we're doing the movement to, or the reaction to, whatever the X is. So.
Well, it's about building capabilities as well, right? And I think this is a significant, you mentioned plans are fine, but the planning process is a lot of value, right? All the exercises that we do, all the live incidents that we do, what you're doing is you're building muscle memory, and you're establishing roles, you're making sure that people are comfortable, who's left of you, who's to the right of you. And when you do that, when you have a mature function that has a process that's behind it, that's rock solid, you can tackle any incident. We've done this recently. We have, for a long time, our cyber program was oriented entirely around internal threats to our operations. And recently, it's all been about third-party cyber incidents. So we were really easily able to pivot and just use the same process to tackle a totally unknown problem. We did the same with COVID. The preparations, we had a really great pandemic plan. We actually wrote in 2019. Bob was the one that mandated, I don't know what you knew, but you knew something. The preparation that we turned out for that, we didn't actually end up using the plan all that much. We used the communication section of the plan a lot. We communicated to the same folks while that work was there, but the actual hazards that we approached COVID generated differently or acted differently than we expected a pandemic to happen. It was much longer, it was much more about loss of access than about loss of people, and it was a different approach. But because we had a flexible, scalable model, we were able to tackle it. I wouldn't say no problem, but it was certainly smoother than it should have been.
Brittany, you advise a lot of C-suites. So how do you get the conversation with the highest level of business leaders to say, look, this is a converged activity. Where's HR? Where's physical security? Where's legal? Why is this a one-stop shop? And how do you get people to break those walls?
No, it's exactly the question I was just going to answer. So good job. Documents are great for internal audit.
Remarks complete.
And then you need to go and do something, right? And I think that's the ticket, is that we're now at this stage of security that we've matured enough to say, look, we know we have cyber to deal with, we know we have this to deal with, these different levels of security that we didn't really have 10, 15 years ago, right? It was physical security, a lot of it, right? And now what we're seeing is the difference between, at least what I'm seeing, if the level of CSO that is significantly more competent in his position or her position is actually doing the test. They're saying, if this goes down, or this SaaS-based application goes down, my third-party vendors, my GSOC goes down, my physical GSOC goes down, power goes out, whatever it is, they're actually doing the test. And that's the difference, is I'm seeing a lot of people do documents, and then a lot of people that are not testing that to go with. And that's the difference of the maturity level.
Is that because we worry about this, what is it, we talk in software a lot about the MVP, the minimum viable product, like, cool, we've got the paper check, next thing, I don't have time to train. I don't have time for tabletop.
Yeah.
I'm gonna send my assistant to do it, I don't have time for that.
Well, and that's actually, so what I do is that, right, is the right hand to a CSO that doesn't have time to go out and test all these documents that they've made for internal audit. We actually go out and test them and ensure that, okay, well, you said you're gonna contact legal, well, how, right? When the internet's down, how are we gonna get ahead of legal? Okay, we need to set up a different third party or third, way of access, or, SRT calls, so on and so forth. Like, we just go through that and line by line. But not everybody has that team,
Right.
right? Not everybody has the budget, not everybody has that. So at minimum, my advice is make a very small, quick plan and test it. Test an A scenario and test a B scenario. And test with whether you're out of power, you're out of people, or your assets are missing.
Actually, I think that's brilliant, because at the end, I think so many people try to probably come up with let's make the most complex thing we can, and at the end of the day, like, if we can get a small win here,
Right.
we can build off of that.
And once you secure one site, and you figure out how to secure one site, you'll secure the rest of the sites in an almost identical the same way. So if you identify how to secure power, how to secure assets, and how to secure people, I always call it the security noun, people, places, and assets, where that's what we do. We secure people, places, and assets, right? And cyber is a piece of that helps us secure people, places, and assets. But that's the interesting part, is if you just focus on how to secure your power, how to secure your assets, and how to secure your people, you can come up with the rest site by site, and the 100 scale as an example.
Josh, I want to kick it back over. Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to remind folks that we also need to start including our risk managers in terms of helping us identify what are those acceptable losses, because you can have the best plan and have everything in place, and there's still no guarantee that your system might not get hacked or some other thing comes into place. So if you are able to just identify what's acceptable and what's not, it helps you with your planning and setting your priorities.
And it's true too, because a lot of times people will make assumptions. We in security, because we also have metrics and things we got to do, like, I'm going to make an assumption that's this, and this. So taking that moment to go have those deep conversations goes all the way back to the first point about maintaining left of bang prior to the issue. Hey, I just want to have a cup of coffee and talk about, first get to know you, tell me what's important to you. I think this is important. Is it? No? Okay, cool. Then we're gonna work to your plan. That's a great addition. I want to go back to and ask you from the FEMA point of view, this idea of like the single security professional, or as you said, everybody represents FEMA at the beginning of the day. What do we do if the single security professional is off the table? How do we think about that, and how do we get beyond that?
I hope they are off the table, because when I look at hiring and I look at what I want to bring into the organization, maybe it's somebody who doesn't know a lot about security, but does know a lot about relationships and resources and communications and all the things that I wish I were better at. That's what I want to bring to the organization. We can, I say all the time in FEMA, thankfully we have a lot of great security folks. They've had either first careers who are with great success and are with us now, or they have just built their way up. And so I need folks who know a little bit about everything. And maybe they were a personnel security specialist. Now they're in charge of all of our disaster security. That's a real story. Where this individual has just worked around and done phenomenal things. And you find those people and you just try and figure out, okay, how do I keep them in my organization? And they need a new challenge. And so let's figure out, maybe this area over here needs a little bit of extra.
Well, it does become a talent issue at some point.
Absolutely.
We're rapidly coming to the point where not like, hey, I grew up with a day kid when we didn't have cell phones and all that stuff. But now that conversation's like so passe. We're at a point now where like people say data-driven operations. Like, hey, Grandpa, that was like 3 years ago. I came out of school with that mentality. So I'm actually very hopeful about the industry, because I think we're seeing natural convergence in the students or practitioners or whomever in the journey model that are now coming into the organization saying, yeah, I've got that. What's next?
Our career maps show multiple ways in a security career map within an organization. We show there's the old, I'll make myself the choose your own adventure books, where okay, which way we're going to go.
Cable time was my favorite.
See, so that's what we want, and we're actually working to build a multidisciplinary security professional, so that people, I haven't worked in a place more than 5 or 6 years in my career. People younger than I am, 2 or 3 years, right? And so we want to make sure that people are moving around and are staying challenged and are doing all the things that we want, and that builds resilience, that builds relationships, all the things that we really want in the world. And we also try to take, don't tell my cyber colleague, but we want to bring people from the cyber side over, because guess what? We all work in the cyber world, right? So that helps provide some cybersecurity expertise, whether it's on counterintelligence side, whether it's on physical security side. It's a great, cross-pollination.
I'll add to that, actually. There's a company that I work for, a client, and they invested, the physical side invested in training each one of their manager to senior manager, and the VPs, they don't have to do it, but that middle level where they want them to grow, instead of getting stagnant physical, they bought them all a first, it's called like the Penn 100, but a first round cybersecurity training. It's like $3,500 a student. And they got them for like $25, so they got this big discount and stuff like that. But that evidently marked an entire evolution or revolution inside of the company that says they found out that their senior managers actually were interested in cyber. And they had no idea until they bought the thing and said, this is the trajectory, this is the professional development, we're investing in you, it's available to you. They all took it. They had like an 80% pass rate. And all they did is just cross-train, right? And it's a $3,500 investment. For some companies, that's cheaper than a conference, So.
I want to be cognizant of time, and I want to make sure that we talk about the idea of tabletops, which I think everyone in this room has had to sit in a tabletop ad nauseum. Some are more dynamic than others. Others are really kind of like watching PBS, maybe back in the 80s. Drew, how do you think about tabletop vice war game and making that dynamic and putting people together to talk about all these issues around failings on the mall and whatever?
Yeah, I mean, the tabletop program is the most critical testing element that we do. We've got a variety of sort of preparation tactics, but the tabletop is the core of it. You have to do it consistently. You have to have a multi-year plan that tests a variety of hazards. And it's also really good to go from really super realistic stuff, the small, low level. The first exercise we did in this building was a gas leak, which actually ended up happening not too long after. And it was nothing salacious about it. It was a very simple exercise, but we learned a lot of really great lessons and had a lot of really great improvements. And that can go all the way to a huge hurricane or a zombie apocalypse. Again, that you can really take any of those sort of scenarios, and I think there's value in all of them. Just make sure that part of it's about engagement, keeping people engaged with a diverse set of scenarios that challenge different parts of the business or different parts of your organization, just to keep it fresh and not sure that you're just repeating stuff over and over again. Definitely having a multi-year plan is helpful and sticking to that to the best of your ability.
And don't forget the end of the story, because a lot of times in our tabletops, we don't get to that end. You get stuck, right? And so you don't get to the end. So I like to have that jump in time and say, okay, this has been great. We're going to talk about alert, notification, communication all day long. Now let's talk about recovery. How do we get back up and going? Because that is where you learn a lot about, oh my gosh, because you don't ever test it. So I really like that. For me personally, I also, I like a good tabletop, and I like them to be not an all-day affair. Because your brain starts to just deteriorate over time.
Half a day at most.
Yeah, exactly.
Jamie, what do you add from the DC point of view? Because I got to imagine you guys have
I'm so glad you asked.
a lot of characters that some are probably not engaged and others are probably
Well,
very engaged.
actually, for us, post 9/11, we have really strengthened our regional relationships and our relationships with our private sector and non-government partners. We've done quite a few exercises over the years. And for example, of course, when the inauguration comes up, you're bringing people together to practice some scenarios to help us anticipate what may happen during an inauguration event. But also, I think, tabletops are great. And for example, I don't like to use this word, like thinking outside of the box or thinking a little bit further. For example, have a tabletop where there's an active shooter, but then the real point of the exercise is that they didn't come in to really hurt people. Right. They wanted to get information off of the laptop. So while everyone is focusing on the active shooter, really they're going in with USBs and maybe. Yeah. So where's the security if everybody's run out and they've left their computers exposed, and look at some of those other situations where everybody's focused on one thing, but really there are other impacts from a scenario. Or also we often talk about FEMA and tell everybody, be prepared for 72 hours. But what if we have an extended power outage that goes way beyond 7? I still don't think we are prepared collectively as a nation to really deal with.
Agree. Prepare to self-rescue. No one is coming.
Yeah.
I realize we're butting up on time, but I'm going to completely go off script and just say, ask each of you briefly, if you could leave anyone with one point, like take this back or think about this as you go on a break and you talk to your colleagues, what might that be? What might one point that you would get across?
I would say that we should consider the human factor
Yep, it's a great point.
as we respond, and also look at the resources, like to use our GIS information to identify the vulnerable communities, the vulnerable infrastructure, those other things to help us make the best decisions or informed decisions as we respond.
I love it. Sir?
I think for me, it's about mixing it up and keeping it interesting, keeping it fun, and keeping it challenging, because you do so much of this all the time. If you can get people's attention, you can get them invested, and you can spark the creativity and get those the newer professionals involved and help build them up. I think that's, for me, the biggest key.
I love it. Brittany, what do you add?
I think mine is test that there's no power when there's no power.
Unplug the
Test.
power.
I know. Well, it's true, right? She even said it. Test that there's no power. Test that you're missing important key individuals on your security team to manage, and test that there's a cyber attack and all your systems are down. Build that plan, reverse engineer with those components back inside of it from where you are.
I love it. Drew?
I'd say build your network. Networks solve problems. You can't do everything yourself. Having a broad, diverse network is the most important thing I've ever felt in my career.
Okay, awesome. I love it. Drew, Brittany, Jamie, Josh, everyone, thanks for adding your conversation to the idea of resilience and getting left to bank. Please find these folks. There's a couple of other questions we didn't get to. I didn't think we'd be able to, but appreciate your time this morning, and thank you so much.